I'm currently a senior lecturer in computer science and software engineering at the University of Canterbury. But the next slide or two's got a bit more about my background because it's a bit more diverse than just that. So my background's quite multidisciplinary. My PhD was in educational technologies. My master's is in strategic management. I've just finished a postgraduate certificate in Maori and Indigenous Studies back home, and this is my third senior lecturer role in three different disciplines. I started out in information systems back in the about sort of 10 to 15 years ago, and then I've had a couple of positions as a senior lecturer in accounting. One of those was actually at the Brighton Business School. So Brighton's a reasonably familiar place to me, and also Ara in New Zealand. And now I'm back basically where I started in computer science and software engineering. There was a gap of 2 to 3 years in between the last two senior lecturer roles when I was in a role of being an academic developer at University of Canterbury, and that coincided with ChatGPT doing its big emergence onto the scene towards the end of that. And I found myself in an interesting advisory role where there were two things we did. One was probably the biggest thing we did was um, try and help academics across the university understand what was going on. There was a perception that because of a seminar that we ran right in January 2023, was that their academic development group knew all the answers to everything, which we knew we didn't. But we ran a seminar which basically raised a whole lot of questions for us about what this stuff means in a higher educational setting. And for better or worse, we did quite a good job of raising the questions. Did that in such a way that people believed we also had the answers, which wasn't terribly helpful. From a personal research perspective, when I started looking at shifting the narrative away from these are tools that students can use to cheat on assignments and to be looking more at these being tools that can be used for enhancing teaching and learning. So that's a bit about my journey to where I am now. I could go into lots of other details, but I won't do that. My connections with Brighton, my wife was born here, lived most of her first 8 to 10 years here. We've visited Brighton periodically over the last almost 20 years at various times, and I've spent some time visiting different parts of Sussex University and also times at Brighton University as well. Okay, so what is this sort of talk all about? Sort of an exploration of the extent towards Gen AI tools like ChatGPT can be used to enhance higher education. A very brief summary of what some of the literature's talked about, some prior work that we've done, and the we is actually, you'll see Martin and Nesbit and Martin reference come up on a couple of slides in the prior work. The other person is actually my wife. So we can look at some of that prior work that we've done. What is emerging now, and a lot of that's from talking to lecturers about what they're doing about using Gen AI in teaching and learning, and what are some of the little gains there might be for people in some places. Some of my things that I'm doing actually on this trip, I've actually in the 4 different universities I've spent as I've been traveling around, I've actually interviewed a number of lecturers formally as part of my research. There's a question about what comes next, and there can be a bit of time for questions and discussions, and if people want to have further conversations on at Sussex through till the pretty much through till the end of next week. So open for more conversations in that time. So some of the things in the literature about what people are doing with these sorts of tools. One of the things that's becoming reasonably common is people using these sorts of tools to generate hypothetical scenarios to actually be from the basis of discussions in classes, also as the basis for questions and assignments and exams. So I remember, and I've done this with myself over the last couple of years, is sometimes when you're writing an assessment and you wanted to come up with a new imaginative sort of idea for the mini case study that's involved, um, that's a tool that a lot of people are starting to actually use, and there's been a wee bit in the literature about that. One of the key things is, and this is an evolving thing about who needs to develop AI literacy. The take that's in a lot of the literature at the moment, and from talking to lots of people, is that everybody needs to. And if we wind back to 2023, late 2022, um, everybody needed to develop AI literacy, and that's sort of been an established thing. One of the situations that we're in now, 2 or 3 years down the track, is that we can have new students coming into the university who have got good skills at using tools like ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot or whatever it might be for helping them work out things, and other students who perhaps haven't had much exposure to it at all. So the gap between the people that know and don't know is potentially actually getting bigger. There's also an issue for academic staff across multiple disciplines to be in that space as well. Um, in the literature, there's talk of um, the some people have actually taken hold of the new ways of doing things and made quite a big difference, and others having been quite reluctant. So there's a big gap potentially emerging there. One of the things that became quite obvious for us early on in the piece was that some universities around the world, some in New Zealand, took the approach of let's ban students from using Gen AI tools. And there's the whole questions around, is that even possible to do? Is was one sort of issue with that. But the other one was the growing number of employers in a whole range of industries now starting to advertise for people for entry level roles that can use Gen AI technologies to enhance what they're doing in their business. So if a university somewhere was to have said, no, we're going to ban the use of this stuff in what we do, that's that's sort of in quite a big contrast to the having employers wanting to employ work-ready graduates, and work readiness in today's world could actually mean using AI to help them do what it is they're doing. Ethical issues were a big thing, and they will continue to be a big thing. I've got this view of the world that's sitting inside a framework that I've borrowed out of the HCI or human computer interaction literature about things to do with different waves of HCI that might apply to AI as well. And one of the key things that's been there and continues to be there is the importance of critical thinking. And a lot of the literature talks about that. And one of the challenges we have is that um, at a basic level, at a novice level, these tools can appear to be quite good. But when you get into a deeper level, which is where you need critical thinking to actually work out what's actually going on in a particular context, critical thinking becomes even more important. So that's sort of a quick summary of a lot of the things that are in the literature. We could take any one of those and go a bit further. But the thing that I'm most interested in is the integration of Gen AI into teaching, and can we use it in such a way that enhance the learning experience for students? And in some of the interviews that I've done in the past, and for some of the ones we're starting to do now, there's a bit of a picture of some of those things that might start to work. There's also a whole lot of other bits and pieces of issues. But so that's sort of our summary of the literature, if you like. Um, the an information systems course back in 2023 that my wife was teaching, she grabbed hold of ChatGPT and said, well, let's see what that actually means for what's in that particular course. When I say course, in a New Zealand context, we talk about courses being what's talked about in the UK as being modules. Okay, and in the UK, you'll talk about a course being made up of a number of modules. Back in New Zealand, we talk about having a program of study that's made up of courses. So if I use the word course, I'm probably talking about a module rather than what would be the typical UK use of the word. Um, so, so what we looked at in this particular study was how GenAI got used across this course and across this module. And in this particular module, one of the goals is that students would get an appreciation of new and emerging technologies. And I didn't spell out what the technologies were, but in early 2023, we had ChatGPT and other tools starting to emerge that were actually part of that. And so part of the goal in that particular course was to cover some basic AI literacy because at that point it was still new for everybody. Rolling on to the next couple of months when it will be 2026. It's not necessarily a new thing for everybody, but it's still new for some people. But it's a thing that's been there for a couple of years for others. And what was used in this module was creating scenarios for formative assessments. So not necessarily things that count towards marks. So if the students were given some activities to do that were formative, that didn't count marks towards their final grade, it didn't matter too much how they actually used the tool, but what did matter was how they used it and if they used it in a way that enhanced their learning. And so some strategies were developed that were around using the tool to ask questions to help understand what the content was, but not necessarily for actually doing the assignment. The generation of scenarios was used in this as well, and partly talking to the students in the module about how their use of AI was evolving and getting students to evaluate how good the particular Gen AI tool was at doing things and giving them examples at the time of things that it might not be particularly good at. And that's been a moving thing over the last 2 to 3 years because a lot of the tools have actually got better. But if we can still find examples of things where the tool may not quite have got the answer right, sharing that with our students actually helps them understand perhaps their ability to critically evaluate what's coming out is a thing that's needed. So that was one study. That was a write-up of what was actually done in that particular module. And there's the reference to it there. Then the next piece of work that we did was we interviewed 6 teachers or lecturers across a range of disciplines about, and these were people that were pretty much early adopters of trying to find ways of using these tools to enhance what they were doing. And those 6 lecturers or teachers were across law, econometrics, education, criminal justice, and English language. So quite a variety in there. And I could go through all the details of what the 6 participants actually talked about, but the interviews of these people were actually pretty much open-ended, which was, and I still am conducting the interviews now to try and get a wider possible understanding of what's happening. They basically asked, tell me what it is that you've been trying to do, how's it been going, what issues have you been discovering, and what things are the most important. So rather than saying, for this particular issue, do you think it's important? It's I say, you tell me what the issues are without any prompting. And on this slide, it's got six things that came up um, from at least half of the interviewees that were involved. A number talked about the generation of hypothetical content, preparing students to work in GenAI related roles, ethical considerations, the development of literacy, promoting critical thinking, and the integration of GenAI into teaching. Now, the fact that a couple of those ones only had 3 out of 6 doesn't mean that those other 3 didn't think these things were important. They weren't the things that were top of their mind when they were asked what were the important things. So my hunch is that all 6 of them probably thought that all 6 of these things were very important, just that they weren't sort of front of mind. And ultimately, when we've got a full set of these are the important issues, being able to go back to people and say, how important do you think these things actually are? So that's initially, oops, yeah. So that's initially what they came up with. The overall sort of findings from just across those 6 interviews as an exploratory study was yes, there are ways in which these technologies can be used to enhance teaching and learning across a range of subjects. And the evidence was that yes, across those 6 subjects, there's the potential. That means it probably is across lots of disciplines. And our sort of overall goal is to demonstrate that that is the case. And so more interviews. There's really been another 20 or so that I've done in the last few months. And some of them have been in the last couple of weeks while I've been on this trip. So that's sort of where things are up to now. The next bit is what's sort of emerging from the more recent people I've interviewed, without having gone and done a big, deep analysis of the transcripts of all the interviews. And there are a number of things that are becoming quite significant in the minds of people that I'm talking to. Challenges for a lot of universities around setting policy to do with how AI gets used, whether it's used as part of teaching and learning, or how do we address issues around students' use of AI in assessments. And the thing there that the sort of where I'm starting to get to is based on who I'm talking to, is that it's possibly not a one size fits all thing. And the reason why I'm getting to that is there's differences across disciplines. There's also differences within disciplines about what are good ways of doing things to enhance the learning of things in that discipline. There's also the nature of the lecturer or the teacher and actually how they adapt to new technologies themselves and what they're willing to do is different. There's a diffusions of innovation module that was developed by a person called Rogers back in the either early 2000s or late 1990s. The years just escape me at the moment. That talks about innovators and early adopters at one end, talks about laggards at the other end, and the people in the middle. And it's interesting for, depending on where you fit in that model, sometimes policies, a particular policy might be restrictive for the ones who are the innovators, but be really helpful at the same time for the people that are in the middle. And that's the thing that I'm starting to see. Then there's the question around policy or guidelines. So, do we need a policy about how the stuff actually is used, about how it happens, or do we need guidelines? And where that came from was actually from my wife. She was finishing her Masters of Education in 2024, and one of the things they were asked to do was to come up with either a policy or guidelines for the use of some new and emerging thing in a higher education organisation. She chose the place where she was working for at the time. She chose GenAI as being the new and emerging or the emerged thing. But she went down the process of guidelines, and one of the one of the things that we think is the challenging, but is we don't if we set a policy to be the policy that's in place for 3 years, as things evolve inside that 3 years, the policy may start to cease to work. And a view of what a policy is that it's the strict thing that must be followed. Guidelines might be more suggestive about here are some guide rails to try and stay in between and perhaps add things to the guidelines as time goes on. And that's just the thing that we've been bouncing around. I've been bouncing it past a few people that have interviewed and been in discussions with, and it seems to be a thing we need to consider. And I can completely understand why for anything, having policies that everyone follows is really good. But I tend to think sort of worldwide, we might still be in a position where we don't know what the answers are to all the questions. And it's just some things that have been running around in my head as I've been talking to people. There might be challenges involved in doing this in all the different ways. In some subject areas, people are retreating back to paper-based exams. There was a move sort of in lots of disciplines in our country and in other parts of the world over the last decade or two to say the traditional paper-based handwritten exam isn't really the best way of measuring what students know. And I was part of trying to work out what was the best way of doing that in a range of disciplines in the academic developer role I had. And just before ChatGPT became the big thing that it's become, a group of academics from a discipline had some meetings with me to talk about how do they change their assessment structure for their modules into being a thing that didn't include exams, so it was a better measure of what the students actually knew and could do. And at that point, we said, well, let's take 2 to 3 weeks to actually go back and mull over what we just talked about at this meeting. And in that 2 to 3 weeks is when ChatGPT suddenly emerged onto the world scene. And our conversation became pretty quickly over the next few weeks was sort of, yes, the paper-based exams aren't the perfect thing for measuring what students know and can do, but to replace them with something that we don't really completely actually understand what's going on, so things that are involving GenAI technologies, are we better to stay with this thing that may not be ideal, but we know what's not ideal about it, and pragmatically stick with that until we work out what is the best way of using or adapting in the world that we're in now to actually have better tools of assessment for measuring what students can know and do. So that's the thing that some places have actually done. One of the lecturers in our law faculty back home, she had actually converted some of her assessments to being non-paper based exams, believing that was the best thing to do. And within 2 years, she converted back to paper based exams. So that's a thing that's starting to happen, particularly when there's external accreditation bodies looking at what we are delivering to students and what students need to do to get through degrees. Disciplines like law, accounting, engineering, those sorts of disciplines where there are professional bodies saying we want to have invigilated exams where we know that students are being assessed on what is their work, not on something that's been generated by something else. So that's a thing that's saying that almost going back in time. Some of the departure from the paper-based exams was because of the coronavirus, COVID-19 times when a lot of universities and lots of countries around the world were locked down and had to do things online, which meant um, invigilated supervised assessments became quite tricky. So there's reasons why some of that happened, but a lot of places are now starting to go back to what they were doing, and that's just the nature of how things have been. One thing that's actually come up for me over the last 3 or 4 weeks from talking to a number of people in different disciplines is almost a generic thing that could potentially work in some disciplines around how we actually do assessments. And part of it is, we need to rethink about how we're assessing students and what are we getting them to do. And what appears to be working across a cross section of some disciplines, and in some parts of those disciplines, but not all of them, but in some parts, is they've actually found the employers who are saying we need graduates who can use GenAI to actually be useful to us in our organisation and find out from them what it is that they're actually needing to be able to do. And quite often, those things are a reasonable match to things that we've in the past got students to do in assignments, but with two key differences. One is about the volume of work the students do, and the other one is about how fast they do it. In a couple of these areas, the things that the lecturers used to use was students would get given 3 data sets about data to do with their discipline, and they might be from different organisations or in different years, and they get asked to analyse the differences between the 3 data sets and produce a report. In the old days, it's quite funny saying in the old days because the old days and the stuff is sort of 4 years ago. 4 years ago, the students would go off and do this work, and it would take them 20 to 25 hours to do. And if you actually gave the exact same assessment to students now, knowing that they would probably use ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot or Gemini or whatever the tool is, they could probably do it in an hour and a half and probably do it more accurately. But what the employers of that relate to these particular disciplines are actually what they're saying is that yes, that's the sort of thing we need the graduates to do, but it's not 3 data sets. It might be 5 data sets for 8 different organisations, which means around 40 data sets rather than 3. So it's doing a lot more analysis of data, which is what the tools are capable of doing. And at the same time as that, rather than saying, here's an assignment where the students have 2 to 3 weeks to do it over, it's going to take 20 to 25 hours to do, they actually say, here is the 3 hour window in which it needs to be done. And so what they're in essence doing is taking what was the original assignment, dramatically increase the amount of data that needs to be analysed, dramatically decrease the time the students have to do it. Before the assignment happens, the students need to be given some guidance in how to use the technology to do the assignment. And at the end of the assignment, the students have to produce a critical reflection of what they learned from the experience. And that's being done in such a way that it's possible to tell that is the student's work. I won't go into all of those details, but that critical reflection on what's been learned and what came out of it ends up being one of the key things to this. And the result is that what the students are actually coming out of that module with is real hands-on experience using the tool in the context of their discipline in a way the employers are actually using it. So that's becoming a thing that's working in some aspects of some disciplines. In one of the disciplines, I talked to a lecturer about, the particular part of that discipline they teach in, and and about another discipline that's another part of that same discipline. And it's very easy to see how this approach would work in one of those disciplines, but not so in the other one. So, but it's the sort of thing where there'll be bits of lots of disciplines where that's a tool or an approach that could be used. Um, just two more points on here. Oral assessments. We're starting to see a growing number of universities and other providers using oral assessments where the students are asked to verbally explain what it is they've actually done. There's a place in New Zealand where I'm an external examiner for their Masters of Applied Management thesis students, and they've introduced a 1 hour Viva for the end of the master's thesis. Um, Basically, the students get asked questions in such a way that if they have used an AI tool to do all the work for them, there's no way they can actually answer the questions. And I've been involved in a number of these examinations where the student in another part of the country is sitting in a room with one of their lecturers, so we can see that they can be seen that they're not asking an AI tool the questions and getting the answers. And I'll be sitting in my office back in Christchurch and asking the questions. And you can sort of tell how well the students have actually done the work themselves by the way they answer these particular questions. That's that approach is all very well and good when it's a master's thesis, but it's because you're not going to have big numbers of them. Translating that back into modules in a big first year intake becomes problematic because they're actually quite time intensive on our part as the lecturers. And then the last one, AI tools to role play. One of the areas I do a bit of teaching in is developing mobile apps. And an idea that I picked up from a couple of lecturers at one of the universities in Germany, this was at Stuttgart University, was for their software engineering students, they have to do an assignment in a group where they build a piece of software to do something. And because of the time frame, there isn't possible to set up the hypothetical end user for them to have a conversation with, or the end real user, so they can have the conversation with them to understand what this tool is actually supposed to do. What they've started experimenting with, and I'm probably going to have a go with something like this myself for the mobile app development course that I'm involved in teaching, is to use a series of prompts to inform the AI tool that they are going to be the user of a new mobile app that's being developed for a particular purpose. Going to tell them that they're a novice user, and what sorts of needs they actually have. And so it'll be quite a big long prompt that the AI tool will actually get. But then the students can actually ask the AI tool questions as if it's the end user of the thing they're going to be developing to get some ideas back. What that's going to do is give the students doing that, developing that app, is going to give them access to some requirements from a theoretical end user, probably give them more requirements than they actually need, and they have to filter out what are the most important ones and do them. And so, but it's also creating different experiences for each group and doing it in such a way that is going to be saving time for me as the person creating the assignment for them to do as well. So a lot of the way in which the tools can be used is to create more authentic assignments for the students to actually do through perhaps having an AI tutor or AI tool having been created to be someone they can interact with as they're working out what to do with the assignment. They still need to do it themselves, but also but also if we can create that in such a way that it's also saving us time as academics, that's sort of where the win-win is. Um, Most of the good initiatives that I'm seeing, they tend to be either saving time and creating the valid assignment, or they're creating a more valid and interesting assignment. A very small number are actually managing to do both. But it's a combination of both of those things that we actually need. Um, I'm here at Sussex till end of next week. If you want to be interviewed as part of that, that'd be cool. Uh, and so that's sort of where I've wound up. There's a set of references there, but I'll actually stop there because my guess is there might be some questions.
All right. Yes. Thank you very much. Do we have questions? And maybe you might need to go or shout.
Sorry, it's just a quick one. Can you go back to the slide with the email so I can
Okay, I'll make sure I haven't lost it. That one there or that one?
the one with your email.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Things like oral assessments we have considered, but we have, and I'm sure we're not alone in this, we have problems with students with reasonable adjustments who, for whatever reason, do not want to do speaking roles or whatever. How has that challenge been dealt with in your experience?
So you're getting the presentations done on Learn and students just reading out what they've said. That's I suppose it already comes here. The tricky bit there is what questions can you ask that takes them outside of the script they've got, to actually make sure that to give yourself some degree of confidence that it is actually work that they've actually done. And yes, that's tricky.
Yeah, sorry, it's more that students don't want to speak, that they don't want to, that they would have some sort of reasonable adjustments due to anxiety or whatever, that the university would then allow them to not have an oral examination. I find this a huge problem, and I'm wondering if others have good ways around it.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think if there are students that, for anxiety reasons, aren't able to do an oral assessment, that an approach to that might be for students in that situation is it that they get given some written questions to actually answer under supervision instead, or in addition. That's the one of the things that might help us in some of this is the stuff that comes out of universal design for learning, where students have the option of have some choice about how they get assessed. And some students might be happy to do the oral exam type thing, where others might be happier to be given some questions and write out the answers. Um, there's a bit of me that thinks yes, that's got the potential to actually work well, provided but then how do we actually make sure that the awarding of the grades are equitable across the two approaches is the other thing. But yeah, that is a tricky one. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I had a question about what you said about doing data science with large language models and just asking students to use them and then do more. That seems to rest on the assumption that what comes out of the LLM use is actually kind of useful or true or flawless. And the students wouldn't have to understand how they would do it manually to make sure that what comes out of it is actually correct. And I feel that's missing a bit of a point, isn't it?
I think there'll be what I'm hearing from people is that that sort of thing, doing that sort of thing will work quite well in some contexts, but in others it's not going to. And I suppose that's one of the challenges working out for each of us in the discipline we're teaching. What is the appropriate use of the technology? What is the good use of the technology? What is the use of technology that is a skill that employers would want their graduates to be seeing? And there's sort of no one answer for everybody, unfortunately. Yep.
Okay. So, but more generally, shouldn't people learn how to do things by themselves before they learn to use tools? Like the kids learn to count before they get allowed to use calculators, right? Isn't this the same? Shouldn't we be teaching people fundamental skills before they and then defer some of it to GenAI because there's more data, whatever?
That thing of doing the fundamental skills before you start using the tools to do it. Two bits of stories about that. Last year, so 2024, two of our civil engineering lecturers came to me and another one of their colleagues and asked us if we could do focus groups for their students as they were doing a fourth year professional studies course at the end of their civil engineering degree. And the reason why were getting us to do the focus groups was research ethics. They couldn't actually do the focus groups with their own students before the results got released. So I went and did the focus groups with one of the other lecturers, and 2024's fourth year students were first year students in 2021. And we asked them, one of the questions that came up in the focus group was about what gives them the ability as reasonably expert civil engineering students to be able to identify what is wrong coming out of a GenAI tool about civil engineering. And the conclusion that came out of one of the groups, and I think it was sort of there in all of them, but definitely in one of the groups, they talked about how it was the solid grounding that they got in the fundamentals of civil engineering in their first 2 years. And their first 2 years were 2021 and 2022, before ChatGPT became the thing that they could use. So it'll be quite interesting to actually sit down and do that same focus group with 2026's fourth year students, because the fourth year students in 2026 would have been first year students in 2023, and have they actually got the basics right? And that's then the question then is, how do we actually make sure that students do actually get the basics right before they start using the tools? And that's one of the big areas that we need to be working on. And that question about calculators, I'm from an old enough generation that I was a 16-year-old when our maths teacher at school said, you must bring calculators to class now for use in class time and in tests and in exams. And my father's reaction to that was, you're going to lose the ability to add numbers together. And I took that to the teacher the next day, and he said he was actually really glad that someone had asked the question. He actually had the sort of an answer. And we might be able to take something from that in today's world, in that his scenario was, if you're sitting there with a handheld calculator and you're adding together two numbers that are both approximately 2,000, and if the answer that pops up on the screen is 75,000, you should know that it's wrong. And the reason why you know that it's wrong is that you should know that 2 plus 2 equals 4. So the two numbers that are both approximately 2,000 added together should give you approximately 4,000. If we lose the ability to be able to sanity check like that, that's when we've actually got a problem. Now, the teaching of maths and what's in maths tests and exams has evolved since the late 1970s. It's now the numbers and the calculation can be more complex because people can just bang it out on the calculator. And in terms of writing the software to do this sort of stuff, with numbers, it's easy. The challenge when it's the written word and lots of alternative meanings from the same words or ways of expressing the same thing, yeah, it's a bit more challenging, but we need to try and find a way of, I think we need to find a way of being able to recreate that calculator moment and say, what are the absolute basic skills that we need? And that's in any discipline. Right.
I was wondering, it strikes me that there's an opportunity because you're interviewing lecturers in different countries. So I know New Zealand, Germany, the UK. I was wondering whether you've noticed any signs of differences in the way that lecturers and students are using AI in different educational systems. So I was wondering whether the way that university degrees are funded and whether students are paying for them might impact on the extent to which they want to get to the end product of the degree in a different way, or whether they feel they want to put in the work because otherwise why would they be doing it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. There's the bit about students who are paying. The One of the universities in New Zealand made a decision, and no, one department in one of the universities decided they were going to no longer have in-person tutors, and they went to AI tutors instead. And a lot of the reaction was, "We're paying for this, and we're paying to have a real person to ask questions of." So, yep, that's definitely a thing that needs to be considered. And the other thing about the differences across countries in terms of how lecturers are doing things and perceive things, um, my selection of participants from a research perspective creates a bit of an unbiased sample because I'm actually trying to talk to the people that are actually probably more at the innovators, early adopters end of the innovation curve about what it is they're actually doing. And the people who aren't doing very much, that are going to have lots of difficulties doing things, not very many of them put their hand up to be interviewed. So, um, that's actually the if you like the hole in what I'm doing. Yeah, so there's no major. So talking to lecturers here in New Zealand and in Germany about what are they doing to enhance teaching and learning. They tend to be the ones that are the innovators and early adopters, and their mindsets across those countries tend to be similar. Not sure that answers the question or not, but it's a tricky one.
Yeah, I can talk to you more about it. I'm going to have another chat with you one time.
So I have to go, but could we get the list of references when you send them to us?
Yeah, Trevor, if you're happy to share your slides, then we could
Definitely,
share them around if that's okay.
I can do that. Yeah, I'll send that to somebody, and they can be shared around.
Yeah. I mean, Alex could help. She's away this week, but next week she's going to be back. But we have one more question there.
Yeah, sorry. It's a question about scaling and basically the resources available. So one of the ways you mentioned was more data sets, more resources basically used. I was just wondering how you think that scales in sort of an undergrad course. So we have a data science undergrad, that's 240 students in just one module. Giving them 40 data sets and then have to use AI tools through all of that, multiplied by amount of modules. Has there sort of been any thought on how practically this can work and obviously there's the environmental impact, but the cost impact as well with having to switch this up?
Yeah. I don't quite catch all of that, but that question about considering the environmental impact of things and that ethical use space, that's definitely a thing because that's a thing that a lot of people forget about is the energy that's actually needed to do things. Um, and then, um, yeah, and working out, okay, and doing more data, yes, that actually might resolve some of the issue, but the environmental impact is there. The areas where it looks like it's a good idea to actually approach tends to be the ones where the employers are saying they want people to actually do that. But there are lots of questions around um, how far can we actually take that? Yeah. And so my goal is these people I've actually had these conversations with in the last 2 or 3 weeks is to in 6 months' time have the conversations again to see what's actually happened, not just the first time they've done it, but the second and third time as well. So I'm not sure that's answered much of the question.
It's a difficult question.
Okay.
Okay, well, I think that's good for time as well. So thank you very much, Trevor. And I hope we can still see you in person at some point.
Yes, I think we're down to meet either later this week or next week.
Okay,
Yeah,
fantastic.
and so my plan is that I'll be yeah, I'll have had more sleep by the time I actually arrive tomorrow for other things.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And get in touch with me via email if you want to have a conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.